Yeah, they change it. Ain't it great when you get used to doing one thing one way, and then we've got an update for you, and they change everything. And it's like
Yeah.
where you used to have to click one button, now you got three.
Yeah, you know who does that a lot? Ancestry DNA.com or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, I have a system that I get used to.
Hmm.
Obviously, they provided the tools,
Hmm.
but then they do that you're saying. They say, well, how about this is better or that is better? And then they rearrange stuff. So instead of taking one step, you're having to take two or three
Hmm.
for the same function. And then you're like upset about it because they're screwing up your work pace.
Well, I mean, I'm not a developer, so I don't know. But I have to wonder, doesn't there come a point where you can look at something and say, let's stick a fork in it and see if it's done? I think it's done. Yeah, we can add glitzy stuff and we can change colors, but that's just change for the sake of change. That's not an improvement. Let's leave things where they are, or give people the opportunity to go back to the old interface. Say, oh, you tried this, you don't like it, you can go back to the other one by clicking this link right here.
Yeah, they have people like it could be anything, but just using these people of ancestry as an example and their website, it could be anything. But they have a pool of, I'm assuming, millions of people
Mm-hmm.
that they can product test in weird ways and
Mm-hmm.
sort of like do little psychological what suits people, but like they can do a lot of kind of secondary and third tier sort of like experimental stuff on people's reactions and behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, but they have your DNA, so like they know if you're prone to, I don't know, smoking and the propensity to scratch your butt every Wednesday at
Mm-hmm.
6 o'clock in the morning, or whatever the heck. So they have sort of a profile of you, I would assume, based on all the stuff that they offer you, which is pretty significant stuff. Um, so I think there's a little bit of that too, that they could be testing different products or different
Well,
stuff.
years ago, there was a program, and I don't even remember what it was, when MP3s first became the thing. Excuse me. And it was all the Winamp. It was called the Winamp player.
Mark,
And
Mark,
I'm sorry. Yes.
can your auto volume
Mm-hmm.
went down, at least
Did
on
it?
my.
Hello.
Okay, go ahead again.
Is that okay? How am I doing there?
Okay,
Am
I
I
don't know
all
what,
right?
after the cough went, it probably green light, red
Yeah,
lit, and
it
now
did.
it okay, it's fine.
All right, we're back now. Wait, but
Yeah.
we better start the show. We've been talking 3 minutes and haven't said hi to anybody.
Oh crap. Are we live?
I mean, are we live?
You
You push
you're
the
the one that
button.
pressed the button. Did I press the button?
You push the button, Frank.
You pressed the button. You've
I
been
didn't
you've been
touch it.
you've
I
been
am buttonless. At no time did my fingers leave my hands.
you've been scheming all this time.
No,
Scheming and
I got on a
plotting.
roll, man.
Okay, I'm gonna come clean about it. I pressed the button. I knew, but we got into our back and forth. We want to welcome you guys to the show. As you can see, we are talking about this, that, and the other, which is typical of us.
Mhm.
Um, we hope that you're having a great week. I don't know about you guys, but here in Florida, the temperatures have been agreeable and different than the heat and scorching, blistering, existence that occurs throughout most of the year. So it's been okay in that regard.
Mm.
Um, so we welcome you. What's going on,
Yes.
Mark?
Just life, the universe, and everything, which is what we discuss here, which is why we were doing what we were doing. Complaining about technology again. Not so much complaining about technology, but changing that technology just for the sake of change. And I was bringing up that media player. It was called Winamp.
I remember.
And if you download it and use it, it had the interface, everything was great. But they offered something called skins.
Mhm.
So you could change the appearance and the user interface. You could make it look like a 50s retro jukebox. You could make it look all futuristic and neon colors and all this. You could, you know, chrome or black or whatever. You could change the way that looked, and it was 100% customizable. I would like to see them go back to something like that. So you could go to, for instance, um, your Ancestry website and download the classic skin, or just apply that classic skin so you're using the old interface. Don't take away any of the features, but just allow people the ability to opt out of the new interface, because new interfaces come with problems. The software company that I work with for the CNC router is an example of that. They changed their interface completely. Then they constantly started, well, they started getting complaints, and they still get constant complaints because this interface, the colors they selected, there are a lot of colorblind people that are struggling with it. And so much so that they're using the old version and warning people not to upgrade, because if you're colorblind, it's almost impossible to use. And that's not something they took into account when they made these changes. And it was simply the colors they chose. So by allowing people to opt back to the old interface, that eliminates that problem. And
Yeah.
I think more companies need to think about that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables involved with all these things,
Mhm.
um, which in a indirect direct way leads to what we were talking about over this link that I sent you, and I'll explain how it connects, at least in my brain. I sent you a version of Led Zeppelin that I questioned and left it open for you to pick if it was AI or an actual group. And what it was Led Zeppelin if it was recorded in 50s music style.
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin 2, I believe.
Yes. Zeppelin too.
Yeah.
And I listened through it. I didn't listen to the complete thing from end to end. I would listen to it to um, get the gist of the style that they chose for this song and why they chose that style. And it did everything from slow ballad to, I mean, real rockabilly stuff. And it's well worth a listen. And I'm the kind of person that when you send me something like that, or if I discover something like that, I'll go to that channel and see what else they got. And they've got a small catalog, but still a very cool catalog of videos they've made, music they've restyled in different voices with different rhythms, different tempos. And some of it's pretty cool. Some of it's kind of really, yeah, I don't think so, you know,
Yeah.
but it was still interesting.
I thought so too. That's why I shared it with you. I took a
Mhm.
risk and shared it with you.
Yeah.
But my question over it, I left you with, well, dude, I don't know whether this is a real group or AI. Now, I did send it to Farju as well,
Hmm.
and I think he said that it's definitely AI in his. And I agree with him.
Hmm. I think
There's
so
no
too.
there's no credits in it and this and that. But
Hmm.
the way the way I link it with what we were talking about when you said I wish people could retroactively use skins and such and this and that,
Hmm.
um, in order to accommodate people's needs when it comes to programs and this and that.
Hmm.
Um, and that people are always inventing new things and it might not quite fit the bill and this and that. Um, AI, you could ask it either now or in some future time to create a similar program with all the features by examining the program as it works. And it may not be encoded in the background the same way as Ancestry,
Hmm.
but they could practically, in fact, you could say to AI in some future time, or maybe now, or somewhere in between, populate my tree. My name is such and such, and I want you to gather and insert in every folio
Hmm.
of each person in the tree that you are going to find for me. to evidence that all the possible evidence that exists in every nook and cranny of the interwebs,
Mm-hmm.
and I want you to, with photos included and directories and all that jazz,
Mm-hmm.
do it. Bling, and there you have it. So, um, I linked that to the AI of the Led Zeppelin and this that in some crazy way, but it's the AI that's the centerpiece here,
Yeah.
of it creating things that, to be honest with you, the Led Zeppelin,
Mm-hmm.
if I didn't know about AI as a possibility, I would just
Mm-hmm.
obviously think that it's a real group.
Yeah. Yeah. And people who aren't as inquisitive may still think that it is a real group. Hey, these guys are pretty good, you know. But yeah, I'm almost certain it was an AI as well, because you're absolutely right. There were no credits, and they've done it with different voices, different instrument sounds, with different tempos and everything, to where if this was a band, there would need to be about 32 performers, because when every song on the album has a different lead singer and instruments sound different, you can tell, well, these may or may not be the same performers if this was actually a band. But um, I've got to give it credit, because the mistakes were minimal. I didn't notice any mistakes in lyrics. When you're more or less creating your own music, when you're setting it to a certain tempo, it's harder than heck to find a mistake, because everything has changed. So maybe this solo in this version is not identical to the one on the album, but I think people will forgive that, because if you pick any solo by Jimmy Page, put it up, look at Stairway to Heaven, look at that longer solo towards the end. Um, it's the rare individual that can copy that note for note. But if you're changing it up, you don't have to. So I think if there were any mistakes, it would be passable. I mean,
Well,
the lyrics to me seemed to stick true. There wasn't nothing like, oh, Jimmy suddenly got a bicycle. What? Where the heck did that come from?
okay, so
So,
so this is what I think about what you said.
mhm,
The criteria that you're using to judge it as
mhm,
AI or not, um, I judge it. Well, I said what I thought.
mhm,
If not for the concept of AI,
mhm,
those things that you explained just now
mhm.
would not be a question for me, because
Yeah.
I already accept that I mean, ever since I bought a Bob Dylan album that was live, that sounded nothing like his recorded material, but I bought it because it was on discount and I was young
Yeah.
and I had to learn to love it.
Yeah.
And I did. I learned to love it. So now I hear the howling, screeching feedback,
Hmm.
and the crowd overtaking the freaking sound of the actual band. And I'm like, oh, that's pleasant, but is it really pleasant, or it's just that I forced my ass because I paid $9.99 for it? So
Yeah. I had a financial stake in this. I better like
yeah,
it.
I'm gonna like
Whether
this
I like it or not, I'm going to like this.
I'm gonna like this green pea ice cream,
Hmm.
whether or because I paid for it. And that's not fair to the Bob Dylan album. It was live at Budokan. I actually like it, but then again, I'm saying
But it
that
took a
because
while.
when I brought it home and and then I heard the crowds, and I was like, oh no! I mean, what was I expecting? It does say live at Budokan, but
Hmm.
in my mind, it was live. So when I was little,
Hmm.
the idea of live in my mind,
Hmm.
I lean towards, okay, it's live, but the microphones are close up, and the exterior noises
We're
are,
going to be in the background. Yeah.
yeah, should be minimal, so you're hearing the performance
Hmm.
in a live setting. But fair enough. Well, no, not this one. This one sound, though, at least the way I remember it. I'm gonna have to type it in and listen to it again. I don't. I have it in my iPod, or my something pod, um, but you can hear the vendors on the
Ice
police
cream here, ice cream.
it's like an enormous echoey sound in some cases and stuff. But maybe I'm not doing it justice. I'm gonna have to sit and
They put a microphone in the roof and the ceiling hanging down about 4 feet, and
one in the men's toilet just
yeah.
for the hell of it. Every time the song ends, a flood.
Well, um, it's funny you mentioned that because my initial exposure that I can remember anyway, my first real exposure to a live album was Woodstock. And I remember sitting in a chair in front of the stereo, big old long console stereo, about 6 foot, 8 foot long, something like that. Seemed like an aircraft carrier when I was 9. Anyway, headphones plugged in, listening to it, and reading the liner notes, reading the album cover. And I read that thing countless times, but there was a little paragraph in there talking about this was recorded live in front of an estimated crowd of 300,000 people, yada yada, and mistakes were made, things happened. um, you'll hear feedback, you'll hear people talking off to one side. They included on the album stage announcements, Bugsy to the pink and white tent and all this other kind of stuff. And they said, think of it as a natural flaw in leather. It's okay that these defects exist because it's a chronicle of the time. It's a snapshot of what happened. And so I always kind of, during Santana's Soul Sacrifice, they come back in real hard, feedback all over the place, but it's okay. That's part of the experience. That's a part of the music. It happened,
well,
and it
that's
didn't detract from the track either.
that's the narrative that they gave it,
Mm-hmm.
and people accepted it.
Yeah.
But at the time,
Mm-hmm.
um, live albums existed. Well, originally, these are just the thoughts that come from that. And I agree with you. Like, I'm not opposed to live. I'm just saying that there's some cases where it's like, holy crap.
Yeah, you chose this performance. Come on.
And you're but just in the context of that,
Mm-hmm.
the 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 sounds that were being recorded
Mm-hmm.
in the 60s, in from the 50s on, where stereo started to come into play, like actual recordings, even though some people
Mm-hmm.
may not have been able to take advantage necessarily.
Yeah.
But it progressed into that. The recordings were pristine, um, for the time.
Mm-hmm.
And even in some cases, even listening from today's vantage point back,
Mm-hmm.
many of those 60s albums are freaking like, it's like a velvety perfection.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you can hear in a lot of the classics that it's part of the era, because there are little bits of
Mm-hmm.
problems here and there that you would recognize as less than hi-fi or whatever.
Right.
But the standard of the time when Woodstock generally is that you had people performing in studio on multi tracks,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not as many as today, but sufficient so that everything was being produced
Yeah.
nicely in their boxes. But that's not the natural way things sound. The way naturally things sound is back in the days of Nat King Cole
Yeah.
and prior,
Yeah.
where it's all recorded on in one take. So that's the advantage of live, and I like it. Stevie Ray Vaughan,
Mm-hmm.
Macombo,
Yeah.
that you can't argue with that
Right.
at all.
Right.
Um, but what I'm saying is that whoever wrote those liner notes um, saw these flaws and recognized them as flaws, and he created a nice narrative that's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Why not? Why can't you have? But it wasn't necessarily. I don't think it was the standard of the time necessarily.
Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I'm not really sure because I can't remember listening to live albums before that. I'm sure I probably did, but I couldn't name one for you. That was such a special event. And remember, the album came out in 1970, and my dad brought it home within a week maybe of it being released.
Do you still have that album?
No, I don't. No, I don't. He had that he kept that. I didn't have that album. I have it on cassette, and I think I no, I don't have it on CD, but I do have it on cassette. And there were different edits to the album and the cassette. The lineup has changed slightly, and they have to do that to be able to fit music on side one and then side two, then side three, and then side four. Whereas on albums, it was 3 album sets. You had 6 sides of music to listen to. But I remember thinking at the time that for what it was absolutely fantastic. I never considered any of the intricacies. Now, you got to remember, I'm 9 years old in 1970. I never considered what it must be like to try to record somebody performing live. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I thought, well, wait a minute now. You've got 6 or 7 instruments, 6 or 7 people playing these instruments. You can't put a microphone in the middle and pick up everybody. You've got to have mics all over the place and run it through a control board to get the sound out to everybody in the live audience. Now you're going to record that. What kind of voodoo are they doing in the background to get all that onto a reel to reel in 69? You know, so I didn't even think about that until I was well into my 20s. Because if you go to a concert, it depends on the sound of that concert is going to depend on where you're sitting. If you're all the way over to the left, up in the nosebleed section, you're not hearing what the people in the middle are hearing from the 5th row. Because they can only equalize and they can only account for so many things. And this is especially true in an outdoor arena, an outdoor stadium or something like that. So where you sit matters. So trying to record it all, I can only imagine what kind of nightmare that is.
Yeah, the as far as the concerts are concerned, so if I had to choose based on accuracy of what's natural, because all these things are tweaked
Mm-hmm.
using all sorts of devices, compressors, equalizers,
Sure.
or through a PA system, and they have multiple speakers. So they're actually funneling the sound that would naturally occur, like if you're in a garage,
Mm-hmm.
um, where each thing is just sitting there, each speaker and whatever. Um, they really work with the sound to for the audience. But if I were looking for the best scenario for my taste, it would be a Macombo scenario,
Small
because what
venue.
happened,
Yeah.
small venue, because you have your, if you are sitting on the left or right, Stevie Ray Vaughan is sitting right, standing right there. The instruments are there, and you're capturing this cozy feeling and stuff. Um, as opposed to this huge arena and stuff. Um, it's almost like it's not like listening to an album, but at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
the even better, an acoustic set or even a classical music set where
Mm-hmm.
the sound is that's an accurate, as
Yeah.
accurate as you can get of the live this and that. But when it comes to rock and roll, everything is so processed.
Mm-hmm.
um, you're there for the live experience, but like
Yeah.
John Lennon used to say, they say, oh, he went to some concerts, but he was asked, I forget the scenario, but he said, I prefer to listen to my music on the record with headphones,
Mm-hmm.
as far instead of concerts.
I'm the
He
same
said
way.
he said something, and I agree. I agree. It's much nicer having to listen to it at home and having your toilet and your freezer nearby.
Yeah. And not somebody behind you, you know,
Yeah,
dancing to the music and then keep bumping into you and stuff like that. But, anyway, I agree 100%. And yes, there's a lot of processing that they can do live, but still putting on that album, putting on the headphones and figuring out why did they decide to put this rhythm guitar over here and the bass over here? Why did they pan them so far out? And then during the chorus, they bring everything so it sounds like it's right in the center, right up above. They've layered voices so you can hear the main singer coming at you straight from the front, but you hear harmonies over here on it. And we've got two voices over here and two different voices over here. You know,
Yeah.
it's figuring out and picking up little details like that
Yeah.
that are fascinating to me. You've heard of Todd Rundgren, of course.
From the Temptations.
No, Todd Rundgren is a songwriter and singer, guitarist, producer. He's produced some humongous albums and written some very, very big songs. Even if you don't know his name, you have heard his music. He did an album back in 1985 called Acapella, in which this was before MIDI, before computers. There was a little keyboard called the EMU emulator, and it was monophonic. It would only play one note at a time. It would not play chords. And
Is that the song I'm not in love?
No, that was
because...
that was 10cc.
Oh, okay.
Probably the biggest one you have heard by him is either Hello, It's Me or I Don't Want to Work. I just want to bang on the drum all day. I'll shoot you a few songs.
Hello, it's me. It's hello.
No.
Is it me? No, I know.
That's the horse with a mustache.
Billy Ocean or
Lionel Richie.
Lionel Richie.
Yeah, I heard him once described as a horse with a mustache. I looked at him and I'm like, damn, that's accurate. He looks like a horse with a mustache. Sorry,
dude, that guy is a beast, dude. Music writing and singing. That guy is like. Well, anyways, continue.
So he did this album called Acapella, in which he could take a sample of his voice and then play it back on this keyboard, but only one note at a time. It wasn't polyphonic, it was monophonic. So if he wanted to do a chord, he would have to divide the chords into its individual notes and play one note and then come back and play the next note and then come back and play the next note and then combine all three of those onto one tape to play a chord. And he did an entire album this way. That the keyboard was the only instrument used in the entire album. Any guitar sounds was his voice run through this emulator. Drum sounds were his voice run through this emulator. And he did an entire album. Now, it doesn't sound like a technological breakthrough now because it's fairly easy to do. But back then, he worked on it for a lot of years to get this perfected, one note at a time. And when you listen to some of this music he did on this record, you wonder, how the hell did you come up with this idea, number one? And why the hell did you follow through with it? Because that would drive me absolutely mad. What I'll do, I'll find one of the songs from that album and I'll post it over on the Trampled Underfoot podcast Facebook page because it is worth a listen. The big song off of that album was called Something to Fall Back On. And I'll find a link to it and post it on our Facebook page. The thing to remember is this song was recorded in 1985 before there were synthesizers that would sample sounds. He did all this one note at a time. And it's just crazy.
Have you heard any of my songs in the past? One of them called Grim Reaper. I don't know if you have or not.
I don't know if I've heard Grim Reaper or not.
Okay.
I've heard a lot of your music, but I don't know if I've heard Grim Reaper or not.
So Grim Reaper, this was sometime in maybe 2015, 16, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was like at the tail end of me actually sitting down and spending a lot of time with music. But I
Mhm.
wrote this song, and what I did was I sat down to think, or the inspiration. So I enjoy, um, what was that band? See, like now, it's, what was that band that Fear the Reaper,
Blue Oyster Cult.
Blue Oyster Cult. So I really like that song.
Hmm.
I like the song a lot. I just really do. It's just such a great freaking song. Um, Don't Feel the Reaper, the whole thing. It's just such a wonderful freaking song. Um, and I wanted to do something with a feeling that I could call mine, hitching a ride on that. But what happens with music many times, unless you're a cover band that really does that, is that you take inspiration that in your mind you translate as being from one place or the other, but the end result may not translate to other people. So other people, if you say, "Oh, you know what? I added this part because of Frank Sinatra in his
Hmm.
1959 album."
Hmm.
You know what I mean, man? And then the other person is going to say, "No, actually, that
I
sounds
know.
nothing like Frank Sinatra's 1959 album, so I don't know what you mean." And the thing is that for the musician, he got a he or she caught a little ride on the winds of an inspiration,
Hmm.
and he might have drawn more on the inspiration than on the notes necessarily,
Hmm.
or whatever the case, maybe something. So anyways, my point is that I wrote this song. So I said I want something like that, and I thought of myself, I thought of the Reaper,
Hmm.
and the Reaper, and then I thought of the Crossroads, because in a sense the devil came to Robert Johnson because he went to the Crossroads
To make a deal.
to make a deal so he could play really kick-ass music.
Blues. Yeah.
And I liked that theme, still do. I like the theme. It's very Americana. And I said, the Reaper. So Robert Johnson went to the Crossroads and he made that deal. But I want to talk about the consequence of that deal.
Hmm.
And so I started with Grim Reaper as a song. And so the story is of a man in some place somewhere that he signs that deal, and he goes on to play music, but he plays in dive bars across the country and so on and so forth, and he spends his life doing the things that he did by the deal that he signed. But then the chickens come home to roost, and in one club in one place, hound dogs appear. And
Hmm.
lyrically I'm explaining all this,
Hmm.
um, in the format of lyrics.
Sure.
So in people's imagination, they fill in the blanks like any other song because it's only a poetic,
Hmm.
musical, lyrical situation, not a developed story and whatever in
Right.
terms of like a book.
Right.
Um, and then that's what it does. It's sort of an imaginative thing. So anyway, so that's what music does, and the lyrics and so on. And so in it, the hound dogs come first, and the reaper, and they start chasing his ass, and he runs across, a field, into a church, out the back window of the church, falls into a cemetery, and the process continues until he gets caught by the hellhounds,
Hmm.
and they tear his butt to pieces. So I wrote that, and then I brought in the following. I'll just say this, and it's, again, it's something, it could be heard there, but you wouldn't attach these things because it's all in my head as to
Hmm.
why it became what it became, and the reference points maybe. But I have an organ part that's the Beach Boys.
Hmm.
Do you remember in Good Vibrations, that theremin, I think it's
Hmm.
called?
Yeah.
I pulled a sound from the keyboard of a theremin because it has a spooky element to it.
Yeah.
Because in a sense, right, even though Good Vibrations is a happy song, it's not necessarily happy. It's almost introspective at the same time. It's a
Yeah.
weird song. But I took and pulled that, and I used that for part of the leading into the chorus. I thought of the Beach Boys and put it in there. I thought of Blue Oyster Cult as the inspiration for that,
Hmm.
and then I thought of Black Sabbath for the chorus itself.
Hmm.
And in the chorus, it gets heavy and this and that. There's a lead guitar. And anyways, I'm composing. I'm bringing in all these little things
Hmm.
that's baked into the song as I actually record it in my mind. I'm orchestrating, conducting an orchestra, but
Hmm.
I don't have other musicians with me for the other parts. I'm the guy doing it.
Hmm.
And so there's this whole creative process. It's almost like writing a little book or a little story, but in musical form.
Right.
But these keys, like what I've been explaining, um, is the reward in a sense. If you're not, if you don't, if your song doesn't hit the charts, but the actual process is a reward because it's a little bit of constructing
Yes.
something out of nothing, and
Exactly.
and so yeah. But there's a lot of hidden stuff that one might not. So anyways, getting to these people that record these albums and the way they push one sound up and another,
Hmm.
and what I kind of explained with what I do here alone at home,
Yeah.
is different than the days of Frank Sinatra or Nat King Cole or
Right.
Fred Astaire and so on and so forth, because they would capture the sound. Yes, they had compression and this and that, but it was one take. It was coming at you. They would put the singer closer to the front, the band
Hmm.
further back, and you recorded this mono signal. So you
Right.
captured this essence as it happened. Once the 60s rolled in, you could do all sorts of crazy stuff, and they did.
Hmm.
And we're a product culturally, in the musical sense, of experiencing that for half a century now.
Right.
So we
Right.
listen to sounds, last part I'll say, we listen to sounds not as they naturally would come out, but as an orchestration, manipulating everything from signals left to right, like you explained,
Hmm.
to the tones and stuff that you would not, if left untouched and you just had a band sitting on the corner, or a cappella group,
Hmm.
you wouldn't have all that weirdness going on. So
No.
this experimental organization of sounds at the technical level is an advent of the 20th century, which I freaking love.
Yeah. In fact, from the mid 20th century on, because they were still recording mono well up into the mid 60s.
Yeah.
And in fact, they started playing around with stereo in the mid 60s because it started to become within reach of the average homeowner or music fan, where you weren't just buying the little mono record player anymore. You could get a turntable with a tuner and some speakers, or you could buy big console stereos like my parents did. And stereo separation. I can remember the salesman talking to my dad about this thing. They had several different brands and they had several different models. But the most important thing to this salesman was 6 feet of speaker separation in order to take advantage of stereo. Because this was when they were experimenting with stereo. And my parents bought records everywhere from like Johnny Mathis to Ferrandi and Teicher and things like that. They were into the more mellow stuff.
Yeah.
I, on the other hand, well, my dad, he had a little bit of a wild streak. He introduced me to Creedence Clearwater and Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and he did bring home the Woodstock album. But um, what they played in the living room could be Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, or it could be Frondi and Teicher, that Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. You just never knew what was going to come out of the stereo. And I could see why he kept saying that, because I'm a kid, 7, 8 years old, sitting there in front of the stereo, and you've got a piano over here and you've got brass over here. And it was just wild to me that they could do that, because my entire experience with music before that was through a single mono speaker in the dashboard of the car, you know.
I do want to update one thing because you brought in stereo
Hmm.
and gave that explanation. Um, you could, and they have obviously, do the same thing they did with mono, where it's obviously you can do that.
Mhm.
But I'm trying to make the point just to correct. You could still capture, obviously, um, even better in a sense, a live performance with stereo as opposed to the mono, because now it opens up the thing like you're explaining,
Mhm.
6 feet of separate, but um, leaving it as is, not the stuff that came later that we're done. So if you want to capture a normal what is as
Mhm.
best as you can, that stereo helps a lot
Mhm.
because now you feel like you're in the room and stuff, um, which is awesome. So there's that too. You can do the same with stereo, but people then got the notion to do all the Jimi Hendrix, Beatles.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say, look at the Beatles, where they have it. I'm trying to remember which song it is on the Sergeant Pepper album, where it sounds like a an old timey car driving from left to right, and dogs chasing it and everything. And then there's a chicken over here, and then there's just it's an old timey farm town scene kind of a
Yeah,
thing.
and then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes, exactly. But
I
the
love it.
panning and the blending and the mixing, I mean, Jim's got it right here. Sound engineers slash producers are very aware of the 3D placement of sounds on a recording. Absolutely 100%. But to a 7, 8 year old mind, this was totally new. This was brand new. And I had never experienced anything like that. And I can remember my dad bringing home an album by the Guess Who. It was Share the Land. And I don't remember which song it was the title track, Share the Land. You have a very low pitched lead guitar and a very high pitched lead guitar. And they start the low pitch over here and the high pitch over here. And as the solo continues, they start moving up your headset crisscross and
Yeah,
end up on the other side. You
yeah,
don't get that on the mono recording. You get that in stereo on headphones, or if you have that 6 feet of stereo separation that the salesman kept, hammering into everybody. And that was always fascinating to me that they could do that. And what fascinated me more than the technology it took to actually do that was the mind who came up with the idea, let's do that. If you look at something a little bit more modern, Freebird, for example, you've got more than one guitar playing that long solo at the end, but they never crisscross them. They don't pan them. They're both playing full bore in your face. So what was intriguing to me was the kind of mind that made that decision to do that.
yeah,
Or in something like Chicago's 25 or 6-4, very few people pay attention to the fact that you need good headphones to hear it. But once you hear it, you can't unhear it. If you listen, there are two drum tracks. You have a main drum in the center, and then off in the right side of the mix, you have another track playing entirely different stuff. And those two combined give it a bombastic sense of urgency that you just wouldn't get without that second track.
yeah.
But once you hear that, you can't unhear it. And that's the kind of mind I like that comes up with something like that. You
Yeah,
know?
there's a lot of cool stuff back in the maybe in the last 20 or 30 years. I think it was in the 90s. I'd have to look, but the Beatles came out with a 2 disc album called the BBC Sessions or something to that effect.
Okay.
And that had never been heard before, unless it was live at the time it was played on the air by the BBC.
Mm-hmm.
And what the Beatles, and so the BBC recorded all this,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the band playing their songs back in the early 60s, mid to early 60s, for the BBC to be played, and they had little commercial shoots of the Beatles saying a few things in between and this and that,
Hmm.
um, and interviews too. And what the Apple did, I believe it's Apple, it has to be Apple, their company, at the time, maybe still, I don't know how that works now. They released this double CD,
Hmm.
and the cover was them somewhere, who knows where, sepia tone, and they were young and they're just being the Beatles. And
Yeah.
when I bought it, um, I think I was the only one of my friends that would even gave a crap.
Yeah.
But when
I
I
went through
bought
that
it,
too.
well, no, but I bought it and I brought it home, and it was brown, like, it's sepia
Hmm.
tone, and it's the brown color, and you open it, but it's like, it feels like you're gonna open up a mystery that's waiting to be
Hmm.
musical, excitement, and I opened it, and there's liner notes, a
Hmm.
booklet, and then there's the CDs, and I place, dude, I can't tell you how special. So it was recorded live, and it's got these skits in it, and you are experiencing the 60s through the Beatles at the BBC through this two CD thing.
Hmm.
I just, to this day, I can't tell you how exciting it was. Anybody else probably, well, there's millions of Beatles fans, but
Hmm.
like, I couldn't walk out my door
Hmm.
and share my excitement with anybody because there's nobody to share
Yeah.
excitement with.
I went through that too, and I got onto the Beatles late, and it was because of the song Lady Madonna. I heard that again. It was on some radio station, probably an FM station now that I'm thinking about it. And I was 15, 16 years old, and I heard Lady Madonna, and I'm like, that is just flat out good music. That's just good stuff. I was aware of the Beatles. I knew who the Beatles were. I was one of those kids that was singing at the top of his lungs, "We all live in a yellow submarine," when that was on the radio. I mean, everybody did it. But that song made me go back and look at it. And I went down and I found the album it was on, which was Let It Be, as it turns out. Got that. And then I said, oh, no, 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 no. I need more of this. So I went back and I got Sergeant Pepper because that's what the record store had at the time. Their Beatles section was pretty thin because this was several years after the fact. Hell, they'd already broken up. And then I got Abbey Road. And I'm like, I've hit the pinnacle. I still think side two of the Abbey Road album was one of the best produced album sides ever. I put it up against anybody's. Just the way they produced that album and assembled that album, it's just yes. Um, then I started going back Rubber Soul and things like that, and started going back and finding all of their older music that I maybe had listened to as a little kid, because when they came over here, I was 2 or 3 years old, so I wasn't really aware. I knew there was music playing in the car, but I didn't, I'm a little kid. I don't know nothing from nothing. But then I wanted to relive that stuff. And wow. But I was the only one in my neighborhood doing that. And I had cassette player I would take outside, sit in the garage and BS with my buddies. And I would make my own mixtapes from albums. And I'd throw in Beatles songs in mixed in with a bunch of other stuff, Steve Miller Band and the popular thing, the Fleetwood Mac, Boston, popular records of the day. And every time a Beatles tune came on, everybody, oh man, you get this old stuff on here for. Listen, that's a good song. Just listen.
Yeah, the Lady Madonna song.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I heard it at home on my parents' furniture, record player,
Mm-hmm.
radio slash thing,
That
with
big
the
consoles.
with the separation of the speakers. I don't know about 6 feet, but it
Mm-hmm.
was the length of what it usually was, a furniture,
Mm-hmm.
size. Um, and it blew my mind. I agree. I could not believe what I was listening to
Mhm.
Every one Beatles song, dude. I'm sorry. Yes, I am a yes. I can't relive like right now. I'm reliving that feeling,
Mhm.
but not the same way as when I heard it. Because the first time I heard it, I just sat there like, what? What? And I would go to the speakers and I'd listen to it, and oh my goodness, I'm hearing a
Mhm.
guitar here, but over there the vocals are on that side.
Mhm. How did
Look
they
at the
do that?
yeah, look at the piano's over here. Look how powerful the piano is. Why are they doing this?
Mhm.
Every oops, every song. That's so excited. Every song, it's just so badass. I'm sorry, anybody that I have fought argument wise with
Mhm.
people
Yeah.
in public spaces over the
Mhm.
Beatles. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I have been at a gig that I was about to play, and the
Mhm.
previous band drummer, me
Mhm.
and him and I got to talking. And he says, and I said, "Man, the Beatles are the best," or I don't know what. And he says, "Yeah, well, the Rolling Stones are pretty good too, right?" And in my face, right there,
No.
and I looked at him. No, I looked at him and I said, "No, I don't think so, man. They suck." I went like that. I was willing to die on that hill, and we almost got to. It got pretty bad where my band members had to get in because he was offended that I would dismiss the Rolling Stones like that.
Yeah.
But if you
Well.
include the Beatles,
Mhm.
forgive you me, I don't care.
Well.
I understand there's other badass bands, but if you include the Beatles in the argument,
Mhm.
I'm gonna side with the Beatles ultimately.
Well.
I know there's other badass bands, but I'm sorry, they did the unexpected.
Well, you got to remember that at the time, the Beatles were everything. Okay, the Beatles were everything. If they put out a single, it was going to the top five, and the only thing to keep it from being number one is another Beatles song. Okay, and it was that way for quite a long for quite a few years. The Rolling Stones, a lot of people thought that the Rolling Stones and the Beatles were rivals, and they really weren't. Um, the Rolling Stones positioned themselves to be the anti Beatles, where the Beatles were seen after a while as the clean cut boys from Liverpool who always dressed in the nice suits. Yeah, their hair was long, but they always looked snappy and they seemed respectful. Even back then, the Rolling Stones, the first word, if you mentioned the Rolling Stones to the average listener, the first word that came to mind was dirty. They just look so dirty and like they're just off the streets and they act so dirty. So they were trying to be what the Beatles weren't. Truth be told, the Beatles weren't in competition with the Rolling Stones. They were in competition with the Beach Boys and the Who.
I don't know about the Who.
They
The
they
Beach Boys, maybe.
they were trying to
No,
one up
dude,
on
I
another.
would push back on the Who. I would just say the
I
Beach Boys, yes, because they admitted as much.
if
You
you
never
listen if
go
you
ahead.
listen to the song, I want to now I think it was Revolution, but I may be no, it was Helter Skelter. That came because Pete Townsend, during an interview, said, "We have just recorded My Generation, the hardest driving song in rock and roll. This is the heaviest, hardest rock and roll song." And Lennon and McCartney were like, "Oh, yeah? Hold my beer." And they got in and wrote Helter Skelter. Put
Yeah,
that
dude.
together. That was a direct competition. And
No, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna push back, but go ahead,
go look into the
Mark.
biographies and
Mark,
everything. They were in a
Mark,
competition
you
with
can't
the
do this
Who.
to me, Mark. We'll
I
go to the
can
trench.
and
Let's
I
go to the
will.
trenches.
Mm.
Let's go scale the barbed wire over.
I'm not taking sides because I love both of them. I do love both of them.
I feel treacheries in the air. What was
No,
that song?
not at
Love
all.
is in the with the deep voice.
Hmm.
Love is in the. This is more like treacheries in the air. How dare you?
I
you know
dare
the
very easily.
the girl with the climate thing. How dare you? You
Oh
have
yeah.
You have ruined my innocence with your consumption. Yeah.
Shut up.
Yeah. Well, anytime anybody makes an affront towards the Beatles, I know you didn't, but
Mhm.
but your incredulity is starting to upset me.
There's no incredulity about it. I'm just repeating the story that I have heard several times over.
Okay, I'm gonna push back now in serious.
Go right ahead.
Okay, although the road that you have paved, I would have to refresh my memory because it's not like I read everything that I did back then and recall it perfectly now. But you're wrong. No, I'm kidding. It's just,
And
I
which
don't
part?
like what you're. I don't like it. I don't like it. No, I do recall because that would be
Some
one way to.
some people can't just some people just can't take yes for an answer. Go ahead.
No, no, because no, but there is that route. Like at the end of the day, there's
Mhm.
just that. No, the Beatles are better, and that's it. You're like,
I
there's
never
that.
said either one was better or worse. I said they were more or less in competition. Their main competition was the Beach Boys.
Yes, thank you for.
Their,
Thank you
and I
for.
said that at the beginning, if you remember.
No, I couldn't because I was still dealing with the additions. No, I appreciate you softening the blow because you're gonna leave me here all the
No.
discombobulated. I will say this: the only thing that I remember about that
Mhm.
scenario that you said is that it, it was Paul McCartney that wrote the song and brought it to the because at that point during the
Mhm.
I believe it's the White Album
Mhm.
they were all writing on their own more. So they had been before, but they would usually bring in a song
Right.
and like he'd say, "Well, here, John, this is what I have," and then John would contribute and this and that, and they
Mhm.
still did, but it started to part like this is what I
Well,
recall. So it was
but they had an agreement from the very beginning that songs that they wrote together, they would be equally Lennon and McCartney,
right,
equally.
right, but
Mhm.
they also explain, and Paul more so because he's the one that
Mhm.
still that whoever wrote the song had the
Mhm.
final say
Right.
in what was included and the way it was written
Right.
and such and this and that. Like they could override the other members'
Right.
decision. Like for instance, Hey Jude, and this is leaving the problem with the Who for a second, but like with Hey Jude, I think it was at a Howard Stern interview. It was funny
Mhm.
as hell because Howard Stern said, "Isn't it true, Paul?" And Paul's sitting there. Is it Howard Stern is unwatchable, but Paul
Mhm.
McCartney was there, so I made an exception. But Howard Stern said, "Isn't it true, Paul, that when you came up with that beautiful song, Hey Jude, you were figuring it out and the band was there, and George Harrison wanted to follow every verse with a little guitar thing, and you just couldn't handle that. It was stupid." And he said, and Howard said before Paul McCartney answered, he said, "Isn't it was like Hey Jude?" And then Harrison wanted to do wee wee, and it followed by every like verse and this and that.
Mhm.
And Paul McCartney says, "Well, yes, it's true, and it just didn't fit with the song." I'm paraphrasing the conversation. It didn't fit with the song, and in the Beatles, we had this agreement that whoever wrote the song had the final override say, and it
Mhm.
just wasn't an appropriate thing and stuff. And they went on with that. But anyways, I'm not saying that to. I'm just saying that they did have that thing. I'm not saying that the Who isn't in powerful and stuff, and it might be for that song. I haven't read
Mhm.
that, but it may be true. But all I'm saying is that um, from what, and I'd have to draw it all back and review it.
Mhm.
The one band that they really sort of highlighted as their their equals
Mhm.
that I can remember was the Beach Boys.
Yes. Absolutely.
And the Beach Boys, the one band that they highlighted that they always was the Beatles. And the
Mhm.
thing is, obviously it's apples and oranges in a sense because
Mhm.
the Beatles have a sound and the Beach Boys have another sound, but they're like that. A lot of
Mhm.
people give very little credit to the Beach Boys psychedelicness, and I
Mhm.
understand why because there's a lot of wholesome, not wholesome. There's a word for it.
I think you were right the first time. They had a more wholesome um, image and a more wholesome reputation
Yeah, but
than the
musically
Beatles
too.
did.
But okay, but musically there was something more
American.
true, but I'm getting at spiritual. There was a sense
Yeah.
of something greater than you. Um, and the Beatles were more, although they did touch on the Eastern philosophies and such, in a sense, but they were more.
British.
I well, they were definitely. But there was something um culturally what's the word, Mark, when it's not spiritual but it's of the like worldly
More physical, more down to earth, more.
that's all in it, but there's an actual word.
I don't know.
Secular. There's a secularness.
Oh, okay.
There's a secularness occurring there. Oh, he got who said?
That was Al.
Oh, very good. Yeah, that's exactly. Al's a mind reader. Um, because he just pulled
Scary
back.
thought.
He just pulled back. He just went like this. There you go. So I don't know if that's the perfect way to say it because it's not like the Beatles.
I do get what you're saying. I do get
Yeah.
what you're saying. But um, you got to remember also at the time, they went from, I mean, just think of the album covers. They went from Sergeant Pepper to what was next in line, I think Abbey Road. The hair
No,
got a lot longer.
the White Album was the next one, I think. Or no, what was that? The movie one?
Oh,
I Am the Walrus thing.
Magical Mystery Tour. Couldn't
Yes.
think of it.
Yeah. So they got.
But the hair started getting longer and the beards started growing out. And so physically their appearance was changing. Whereas the Beach Boys, even though Brian Wilson started having longer hair, they had a more clean cut image. They were more, as you put it, Americana sounding. They still kind of, even though they were getting into psychedelia and they were pushing forward with the technology, they still kind of had that early 60s surfer image that was more acceptable than these long hairs over there who are starting to look grubbier and shabbier every week. And then by the time you get to the Hey Jude album, where you can only see John Lennon's glasses in his eyes, it's like, what the hell happened to these guys? That was outward appearance, and to too many people, perception is reality.
I get that, and
So, so there was something different about the Beach Boys, not only in their sound, but again in the feel. And I think you may have hit it when you said almost a spirituality associated with the music, where the Beatles seem to be more secular.
well, let me
I, I,
attach it.
I, I
Let,
think
let
you
me
may be right about that.
let me attach it to what you're saying about the Americana part
Hmm.
because I was so let me attach the two because now I was thinking after you said that this came to mind. Um, it's a combination. I think we have to somehow arrive at something similar to that because it's this Americana. There is this spirituality. There's this look. There's this wholesomeness. There's all these combinations when we're talking about the Beach Boys that are different than the Beatles. Although they cross paths in many ways too. But Van Dyke Parks, the co-writer during the Smile sessions for Smile by the
Hmm.
Beach Boys that never came out. Instead, they released an album called Smiley Smile,
Hmm.
which, if you've ever bought it, I bought it obviously decades after the fact because,
Hmm.
I wasn't around that time. Or maybe I was, but I was little. I don't know. I'd have to look. Smiley Smile was a way for them to meet their dues for the recording company,
Yeah.
record company.
And I want to say it was released against Brian Wilson's wishes
Okay, but
because he didn't think it was finished.
Oh no, they didn't want it, but they did it to meet the
Hmm.
contractual thing.
Yeah.
But if you ever listen to that album, it's so not up to par,
Hmm.
sound quality wise and finished wise,
Hmm.
and yet I love that there's a special feeling to that sound, a song, album that I enjoy. Now, with that said, there's a song that they wrote, Van Dyke Parks as the writer and Brian Wilson as the musical,
Hmm.
that encapsulates this concept of Americana plus spirituality. In my opinion, I
Hmm.
don't think I would be pulling a stretch here to say, and it's called "Heroes and Villains." It's one of my favorite songs of all times.
Hmm.
Um, and Van Dyke Parks, born in Mississippi, is a lyrical genius. He really sets about the business of memorializing America
Hmm.
in musical form and poetic, and musically,
Hmm.
lyrically, and whatnot. And in the song, he wrote the lyrics, which Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys, sang, and it captures America for the past century and a half,
Hmm.
heroes and villains. And when asked about the song, Van Dyke Park said, "Some people ask me what the song is about, and I think it's about Brian and I trying to rid ourselves of the guilt of the past 200 years or so, of the horrible things that occurred throughout the span, but looking for redemption." And so he's basically making a case for the history of America and the pitfalls and downfalls, the things that happens. um in the song, he said he pictures a woman and a man, and the lyrics is like, it goes something to the effect of, the heroes and villains. I'd have to look at the lyrics, but it's a Spanish woman married, of Indian and Spanish descent, and she gets into a situation where there's bullets flying all around, and there's criminals involved and stuff, and it's a sort of like a snapshot of things that happened in the West. And the song is beautiful, the heroes and villains. I'm not doing it justice by
Yeah.
any in it there's a
Hmm.
sense of spirituality, longing, all
Hmm.
these beautiful things in a wholesome way, even though there's tragedy. Whereas the Beatles, they may have that as well, but in a sense it's a world apart. It's a
Yeah.
world apart. So I don't know how to actually properly separate the two into their own categories, other than saying what we both have suggested, more or less, a Americana. There's a spirituality, a wholesomeness, and the Beatles had qualities of those along the
Hmm.
way. I don't, how could you separate the two? I know you
you
can.
you really can't, and you really can't compare them either, because they were working to different ends, um going for different sounds and going for different moods and different feels and different feelings, wanting to evoke different feelings in people. In their commonality, though, was in pushing the technology that they had to its limit and doing everything they could to try to get something in that they couldn't figure out how. They wanted a certain sound, couldn't figure out how to do it. They would try to figure out a way to invent it.
Experimentations.
And both of them were heavily experimental during those times. I mean, Pet Sounds being probably, a lot of people are still arguing over who was the first progressive rock album. Was it Pet Sounds or was it Sergeant Pepper? I think everybody agreed that both of those albums pushed the limit. And technology was evident in just about every track
Which
of
came out
both
first?
albums. Pet
Which
Sounds
came?
did. Pet Sounds
Okay,
did.
so then, in a sense, okay, so in a sense, yeah, I'm sorry. Pet Sounds is so beyond beyond anything that you can put in a little box and say, here it is. Pet Sounds is a freaking savage album. And what he decided to do in it was, dude, decades and decades ahead of its time, dude. It's just
Um,
there's no other way. So I
I'm,
would choose Pet Sounds, even though the Beatles are like the Beatles are freaking. You can't. I can't. Can't decide. I can't decide. But I would pick the Beatles.
I thought you said you would pick Pet Sounds. Um,
No, I'm saying like overall.
no, I gotta interrupt you. I'm sorry because I'm trying to search for something, and my router on occasion decides to cut out, and I have to reset it.
Okay.
I am trying to search for something, and it's not connecting to Google. So, and Facebook is now telling me that I am currently offline.
But I can see you.
If I disappear, that's why. It's because my router needs to be reset. Just know that I'll be back. So you may have to tap dance a little bit, but it's connecting right now to this, but I may blank out at any moment.
If you do
Okay.
blank out, I will tell you.
Hmm.
Oh, by the way, I'll do exactly what you said. But apart from that, I will tell you
Hmm.
that I will double down and make a case for whatever the heck in the interim,
Hmm.
so that when you come back, I've created a enough bob wire so that you cannot take down the outcome here. I'm talking a
Okay.
bunch of bull. Just
Well, you do you, man. That's all I'm gonna say. But I'm trying to search for what I was trying to search for was when did Pet Sounds come out,
I'll,
and
I'll look.
when did Sergeant Pepper come out, and it's telling me I'm offline. It cannot connect to Google. Then I move over to Facebook, and there's a little black box that pops up at the bottom that says you are currently offline, and it's
Here,
trying to reload my page.
let me read the. I can still hear you. Let me read
Hmm.
the outcome. I typed in which came first,
Hmm.
Pet Sounds, and when I wrote Pet Sounds, Google
Hmm.
finished the question for
Yeah.
and said which came first. And it says Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys was released before Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Hmm.
Released on May 16th, 1966. It's
Right.
considered one of the first rock concept albums.
Yes.
And then Sergeant Pepper was released in May of May 26th of 1967, so a year later.
Right. Now the argument has not been about who was a concept album. The argument was about which was the first progressive rock album.
No, but these aren't progressive
So,
rock.
well, but people are making the argument. I'm not of the opinion that I kind of am, but kind of not, that Pet Sounds is progressive rock. I'm not sure.
It's psychedelic rock.
It is. Um, but I do think that Sergeant Pepper was progressive rock just because of the different elements that they incorporated into them, a more orchestral setting, and then combine that with a faux live set with Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and then its reprise. They didn't play that and record that live. That was done in the studio, and the audience was added as a sound effect.
It's a
But
concept album.
um, yeah, okay, I would agree with that. But I also think it's progressive rock at the
The
same
the
time.
the normal or the standard going um, usage of the word progressive rock falls into the category of bands such as what's this band from Canada, uh, Rush,
Rush, yeah,
um,
Pink Floyd,
Pink Floyd,
King Crimson, yes.
exactly.
Mhm.
That is what's typically referred to as progressive rock.
Right.
You can pull the progressive rock because they are progressing,
Hmm.
but it's not
But
typically used in for the Beatles.
no, it's not typically, but that's what they were saying about um, Sergeant Pepper in that a lot of the elements that became the trademarks of progressive rock are in that album. Not so much with Pet Sounds. While other people will argue, yes, they are. Now, I agree with you that Pet Sounds has a legitimate claim to being the first concept album. I don't know about progressive rock. I don't think Pet Sounds is progressive rock
No,
to me. Just
I don't.
my opinion.
It's just the word. It's kind of like asking you, "Hey, Mark, are you a boomer or Generation X?" Well, you were born in such a time where um, there's
It,
slight
yeah, it
there's
just depends on who you listen to,
right.
you
So
know.
there's a little bit of crisscrossing of
Hmm.
possibilities. So it wouldn't be wrong if somebody said, "Yeah, they're progressive," but it is not typically used
Hmm.
to reference the Beatles. It's usually not.
Right.
So it falls into that kind of a situation.
Yeah, and I
Like,
agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. It's not something that I would generally use to describe the Beatles,
yeah,
but you could argue that a couple of their albums are progressive rock. If you listen to the orchestration that comes along with it and the elements that you would define as progressive rock, it exists in the album. And it's like, wow. But no, I
yeah.
wouldn't I wouldn't call the Beatles a progressive rock band. Now, you look up progressive rock in the dictionary and you've got Dark Side of the Moon, King Crimson, and yes, their album covers are right there. That's the definition of progressive rock, you know. But and the Moody Blues also. You might argue that Days of Future Past was the first progressive rock album.
That is a good one. It was a concept album too.
It was definitely a concept album. But Days of Future Past, I'm trying, and this is where my router is giving me fits. It won't connect. Nope. The site can't be reached. The server IP address could not be found.
What do you want me to type in?
Days of Future Past,
Okay.
and that's the Moody Blues. That's that album.
And what do you want me to search for of them?
Just what year it came out.
Okay. It was released in November 10th, 1967.
Yeah. Now, I don't think anybody would argue that that was not progressive rock. And we're looking at 67. So probably just slightly, was it just after Sergeant Pepper or just before?
Well, but wait
So
a
right
second.
in there in that ballpark.
Oh, okay. If you're gonna make that
Hmm.
claim,
Hmm.
what are you defining progressive rock? So I'm not a progressive rock aficionado per se, and I don't really qualify the term. So I don't have a solid, like, I know certain bands fall into that category, but it's not like so. But what would you describe as falling into that category?
The use of orchestration of instruments that would not normally be associated in rock music. Long solos, breaking away from that AM top 40 plastic banana rock and roller 3.5 minute ditty that's going to get into the top 10 and going long format. A great example of a Beatles song that is progressive rock in my book is A Day in a Life, where you have it's a long song, number one. You have sweeping strings, you have a lot of piano, heavy emphasis on the piano, tempo changes, lead singer changes, and just the whole vibe and that feel is progressive rock of that song.
Okay, well, I'm not too fond of it. Breaks from my general blurry notion of progressive rock because I put
Mhm.
a for some reason late 60s there's key bands that then spilled over that I would say fall into that category of progressive rock. But things like Jimi Hendrix,
Mhm.
um, or Led Zeppelin or all that stuff.
I would
Uh,
not call those progressive rock.
no, but you could, using the definition that
You
you
you you
chose.
might consider Stairway to Heaven to be progressive rock, but Led Zeppelin would be a hard rock band.
Yeah, but my problem
I
with the
mean,
definition is that there's overlap because there's
well,
no
there's always going to
way,
be a little bit of overlap, yeah.
because progressive rock can and does have heavy guitar parts. It does have all the there's overlap because you're playing with so look, how about even the term frickin' rock? In my opinion, if we go to the inception of rock,
Hmm.
it's basically the stuff from the 50s, which did have a earlier thing. But if
Hmm.
we're gonna go to the key thing of what rock is, it's like freaking, I don't know, Fats Domino.
Okay, go ahead and reset it. Okay, she's going to have to reset the router because now she's completely off too, and you're starting to freeze up here and there.
Okay, so what does that mean?
That means I'm going to disappear probably for about 3 to 5 minutes, and then I will be right back. As soon.
So, oh well, he definitely froze. I just want to make sure that that you guys can see me, because I don't know. It looks like I'm okay, but I'm never quite sure when somebody else freezes, whether it's me or the other person. So if you can leave me a message that there's communication. Um, oh, I can see you, Elo. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to take the advantages to say that I don't know about this progressive rock uh, qualification that Mark was using. You can use it. You can use anything, but I have dividing lines in the music where the 50s is a one thing. Well, there he went. His image. The music of the 50s under the category of rock was one solid thing, and it had branches. There was the surf thing that started to develop as well, the instrumental stuff too. Like there was a branch, but you had this 50s sound that then moved into the late 50s that started to change, it spilled into the 60s, and then you get this thing where you have Beach Boys and the Beatles early on, and then a whole series of the British Invasion, and then they start including, because the technology is also changing, and there's cross pollination with people's different inspirations. So there's all this cross pollination. So somebody will take something from one band that they were inspired by, and then they produce it over here, and it starts to sort of like, congeal and break into different pieces. And so that's the explosion of the 60s, with so much goodness that, you know it's the 60s. But it didn't stop at the 60s, because then it spilled over into the 70s, and you started getting even more. The hard stuff started to become more popular, even more so, and then more bands were, and so then you had this transition where it just, into the 70s, where it just, you had some of the old stuff blending in, softer sounds, then you have this heavy duty stuff coming in, and so each phase has variations in it, although it's a timeline. But I don't divide the categories like Mark was necessarily saying. And he's back. Damn, that was quick, dude. Thank goodness, because I,
I understand, but whatever it was, I disagree 100%. Go ahead.
that was quick, dude.
Well, I just had to unplug it and then plug it back in.
Well, you threw out a number like 5 minutes. Did I just do a monologue for 5 minutes? I don't know if I did or
I
not.
don't think you did, but I think it was about 3. But that's
Let me
okay.
just let me just catch you, and maybe we should answer some of the questions or some of the comments. But let me just um bring you up to date with what I said.
Hmm.
Is that I don't necessarily, I see the timeline as the 50s had its thing, and it advanced and spilled over into the 60s, and early
Hmm.
on you had the sounds in the 60s, the Beatles and the British invasion occurred, and then cross pollination occurred, and as the 60s came into its own, and then into the 70s, then even the rougher sounds started to get even more ubiquitous and popular, in the 70s, and so I just see it as a progression. So I don't necessarily delineate the way you do. Maybe in that case, maybe we're similar, but like when it comes to the subcategory situation,
Mhm.
I really feel like at best progressive rock at the end part of the 60s, but really it's a phenomenon of the 70s. I feel that's true. I know that you can extend it into the past, but for me, it feels like it's stretching it too much.
Well, the way progressive rock is defined as, it's based on a it's based on fusions of styles, approaches, and genre involving a continuous move between formalism and eclecticism. Um,
Are you still trying to get back on?
no, I'm on, sweet.
Okay, because you're not on when I'm in there.
Refresh. Sorry, still having technical difficulties.
I can see. I can see. I was gonna pull a fast one and say, "Mark, where'd you go?" and like pretend, but I can't get
Yeah.
away with that.
Well, they it started in the mid. It developed in the United Kingdom in the mid to late 1960s and peaked in the mid 1970s.
Progressive?
Progressive rock, yes.
Yeah, but who's saying that?
Um, um, this is the basically it's on Wikipedia, so I don't know who wrote the definition, but the style was an emergence of psychedelic bands who abandoned the standard pop traditions in favor of instrumentation and composing techniques more frequently associated with jazz, folk, or classical.
Okay.
They added those elements, and that contributed to the progressive label. Lyrics were more poetic, technology was harnessed for new sounds, music approached the condition of art, and the studio rather than the stage became the focus of the musical activity. They would tour to support an album and to promote an album, but the main focus was done in the studio to heighten that experience. Jim
Okay.
Dockrell's got one here, a good one here. Think Emerson, Lake and Palmer. You know, that they combined a whole bunch of different styles. And in that, using that as my definition, that's why I think A Day in the Life could be classified as a progressive rock song, but I don't know that you could say that about the entire album.
Yeah. I feel weird about that.
Mhm.
I personally feel weird about that, but obviously, um, I okay. I just feel like the Beatles and think that the
Mhm.
Beatles and really feel like the Beatles, like really that the Beatles are above all that other jazz.
Well, it
Like it's my personal take on it. So in a sense, I feel like how dare you?
but you can see their evolution because they started out as a pop band, a cover band, and then started doing their own songs and became really poppy at the time. And other bands scrambled to copy them. The Bo Brummels, oh come on, Paul Revere and the Raiders. How could I forget that name? Uh, just a whole bunch of different bands came along to try to capitalize on the Beatles formula because it worked, you know. So no, they're not a progressive rock band, but you can see the progression of and the evolution of their music because Rubber Soul is nothing like what came before it.
Yeah, but you're using the term
So
progress.
so
And
no, I'm using the term evolution because the music did evolve as taste changed, as their taste changed, and as their position in the music industry allowed them to be more experimental.
yes, but I'm arguing that you're using the term progressive
Mm-hmm.
to see a continuation of advancement or progress or evolution. Same
Mhm.
difference. The point is that you're using it loosely, in that if it's true for the Beatles, it's true for every band that has done something different as they move forward. And that's
Mm.
kind of the problem that I have with it. Because you can make that argument for various other bands that start off one way and then move into another thing, but then you
And
can
but what,
go.
no, not because progressive rock is a very it it it's kind of like art. You know it when you see it.
Oh,
You know, it really is. It's one of those things. Um, excuse me, Al said King Crimson had 3 shots at recording an album before they were satisfied. In the Court of the Crimson King was released October 69 and is widely regarded as the first progressive rock album. My argument with that is the Moody Blues Days of Future Past. That is not only a progressive rock album and a concept album, it was released 2 years before Court of the Crimson King. So I would argue with that assertion that Court of the Crimson King was the first progressive album. I would argue with that.
I don't know. I don't. I think that something seems like unattainable to divide or categorize here,
Well,
in that too much is included and not enough. But it's the same with the concept of saying something is rock music. If you really consider what rock music is, its original inception has something to do with the music of recent years, let's say.
mhm.
But if you want it to be the letter of the law, it's not the same.
No, it's not. And let's also not forget that rock comes from rock and roll. And there are some that would argue rock and roll died with the advent of the surfer music, that wasn't real rock and roll. That was surfer stuff. Buddy Holly was rock and roll, you know. Well, there's a lot of bias in there, depending upon who you are. And there's a lot of subjectivity there as well. I think that to an outsider, it's all rock and roll. It certainly was to Billy Joel. You know, hot punk, cool funk, even if it's old junk, it's still rock and roll to me.
Yeah,
Um, but
but
but by the time you get into Pet Sounds and um, some of the Hendrix and Sergeant Pepper, the rock and roll part was starting to leave conversation. It was doing it beforehand. When you started getting into psychedelia, at the time they didn't call it psychedelia; they called it acid rock.
yeah, but these things are meant to be, or not meant to be. They simply are.
Hmm.
These things to do with definitions and
Right.
whatnot is basically, it's left in the ambiguous world of whatever you think or whatever I think.
And I'm going to be 100% honest with you here. I prefer it that way. There are a lot of people who want to sit there and try to analyze what genre is this, what genre is that. Would you call that folk rock? Oh no, I would call that jazz fusion. Forget it. It's you either like it or you don't. And if you like it, who the hell cares what it's called?
Well, if you're going to organize a timeline, if you're on about, so if you're enjoying the music, that's one thing. But if you're an aficionado over,
I'm,
look,
I
if
don't
you're
know.
a, well, no, let me make this point. If you're a bass player,
Hmm.
there's many options, there's many other ways of saying this,
Hmm.
but I'm going to use one specific one. If you're a bass player
Okay.
and your business is learning the bass, the traditions of the bass, and certain musicians as they branched out or toppled into some other subcategory because they
Mhm.
started using other tricks of the trade or
Mhm.
brand new ones. Like you're really into exploring that because that's like what you do.
Mhm.
You might be interested in creating boundaries from one group that performed in a certain
Yeah.
style as opposed to, and so you might start to create divisions between one style and the other and this and that. So you might have that, but there's other musicians that might be doing the same, and there might be overlaps
Exactly.
where where the bass player delineates one style from another based on his criteria because it's vital to his instrument, but the guitarist would say, well, no, because this same type of thing, so no, this type of music would not be categorized. So you have all this overlapping
Sure.
interplay where, and so you as a listener, us as listeners, just like casually, we might, it's kind of like saying, I guess it's kind of like saying Metallica, is it thrash metal or is it heavy metal? And if it is heavy metal, well, why is then Guns N' Roses heavy metal when they sound nothing like there's all these things that
Right.
interplay. And yes, you're right, if you like it, you like it, but there
Mhm.
might be valid reasons for specific people to sort of organize it one way or the other.
I do get that, but I think along with that comes just too much pretentiousness for me. You know,
Well, from your
I
vantage point,
from
because
my
you're
vantage point, and again, this is 100% subjective. It's 100% subjective, but I can get just as deep into Motown or blues as I can get into anything Pink Floyd ever did. It just depends on the mood,
yeah, yeah,
and
but that
I don't care the genre.
yeah, but that's too okay. But you know that that can be true, and I agree. Like I like Motown a
Hmm.
lot. Like it's freaking awesome. But like funk, like
Hmm.
funk, I really do. But that can be true.
Hmm.
While the other thing is at work as well because you're a, I don't know, maybe you're a lyricist and you
Hmm.
find that the verses
Right.
from the 1930s might differ and you're a student
Well,
of that. And
yeah.
so you're creating divisive lines in order to just organize the thing
Hmm.
you're studying. Um and so that's valid too. The problem is that if you as a lyricist come in contact with a violin player or I don't know whatever, like a
Hmm.
keyboard player, they might like object because their instrument overlaps what you consider a dividing, and it becomes this whole thing. So you as the casual listener, me as a casual listener, I do have certain little divisive lines, but they fluctuate in
Hmm.
reality. So I'm not thinking, man, this is an awesome progressive band. No, I'm thinking,
Yeah.
man, this Pink Floyd album is rocking. Or
Exactly, and I'm this exactly the same way, and that's why I put a little less emphasis on what genre something is. I do understand that there are definitions. There is rhythm and blues. There is rock and roll. There is heavy metal. And the blending of them is rare. It happens, but it's rare. If you are of if you are the type of person who loves to listen to jazz and blues, you're probably not going to be really interested in metal. Then again, you might be.
yeah, you might have
The
overlap.
exactly the number of guitarists that they've got stellar careers. The number of guitarists who listen regularly to Django Reinhardt or Roy Clark
Yeah.
or Glenn Campbell would just blow you away. They're completely different genres. They're not in any kind of competition at all.
Mhm.
But game recognized game. They understand that there is a master of the instrument playing that instrument.
Yeah, you're learning from them
Exactly.
or entertained by them.
Or
It
even
doesn't have
taking inspiration from them.
yeah, you
Um,
don't have to play the same thing that you're entertained
no,
by.
exactly. Or you can take inspiration from them and apply to them. In the Sultans of Swing, Dire Straits, Mark Knopfler is playing the outro solo, and he gets into some really fast picking. It
I have-
is, yeah. Steve's into REM right now. Exactly. Because according to Steve, there are two kinds of music, country and Western. Um, but and that's cool. That's great.
Greg, it's hilarious because you see what he did there. Okay,
I do see what he is.
it's no, but it's good. It's good.
Not the group REM. REM sleep. Yeah, exactly. Rapid eye movement.
Well, no, he's doing two
Mhm.
in one. It's beautiful. Go ahead.
But that outro, that solo, he gets into some really fast picking. But if you listen to it, it's a Vivaldi exercise. It's a Vivaldi arpeggio that he's repeating over and over and over again.
I gotta exercise this out of my head.
If you get into, well, AC/DC, Angus Young, Thunderstruck, that opening riff, the very fast picking that he's doing, that's a Bach arpeggio
I could picture
exercise.
Steve right. I can picture Steve right now as you're going into the arpeggio. No, this is what. No, in my mind, I'm thinking.
Yeah, he's been doing that since we stopped talking about technology.
I could picture him and like the cat moving in front of the screen.
Well, see, I have a theory. I think Steve comes into our podcast. This is where he gets his quality naps because he wants to be here. But the minute, are they going to talk about music? Are they going to talk about, oh, good, they're talking about music. Now I can rest for a bit.
No, I can see, those little eye mask things.
Mhm.
He goes, okay. And like bunny slippers and like one of those robes, like is somebody getting the paper, like in one of those old Hollywood movies. He's just sitting there.
Well, you notice he ain't replied for 15 minutes.
Great. No, and I love how we're assuming so much over Steve without him.
He's not denying it. And then that kind of is, helping to perpetuate. There he is. He's putting up the links. I'm going home. Screw this. I'm going to bed.
I so he did. So maybe us talking about so we broke.
Now what he's doing is he's trying to figure out where he's going to have our website.
Oh yeah.
Forward to. He can send he's going to redirect us somewhere.
No, but the problem is that we broke the third wall. Is it breaking the third wall? We broke the third wall. If we would have not mentioned it, it would have just floated.
Yeah, but what fun is that?
Well, Greg did that. I do want to mention this, but I think we could start turning the
writing it down. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why not? But I do want to mention one thing that Steve's not going to appreciate because it's still within the thing, which makes it difficult for me
Get
to
on
say.
with it, homeboy.
It makes it difficult for me to even, because once you have a. Anyways, going back to what we were talking about. Sorry. All that said, we're gonna just go right and pedal to the metal. The Beach Boys came out with an album. What makes it worse?
They came out with a couple, I think.
What makes it worse? We're dragging Brian Wilson back into the friggin' show. I've got the giggles now. Because of the irony of the. So Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys recorded this album called Party.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my last thoughts of how cool certain things are. If you ever have listened to it, and there's no reason why you haven't, and all of us out there, it's a live album.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a live album. It was marketed as a live album.
Mm-hmm.
But what they did was they sat and recorded, and then they brought layers of people just talking and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they started stacking it so it sounded like a live beach party.
Mm-hmm.
And they do Barbara Ann that way and all the cool songs and this and that. And I love that concept where it's pseudo real, but on purpose to give the illusion that works very well of a live, you're at a clam bake in your mind. And you're thinking, wow, this is real cool. And yet, it was layered. Freaking bad to the bone, dude. Anyway, I just want to
go back to the 70s and listen to a Marvin Gaye song called Live It Up. He did more or less the same thing. It's recorded in the studio, but then they brought in conversations. You can hear conversations going on here back here, and glasses clinking, and it sounds like you're at a party. He did the same thing, you know. In fact, there was a song, I can't remember. Pharrell Williams did a song, and Marvin Gaye's estate sued because they said, "Yeah, you ripped it off." What was it called? I can't remember the name of the song. This was just here recently too, within the last 3, 4, 5 years. Anyway, probably one of the more famous songs to do that, where you think it's a live song, but they actually layered in audience, was
Right.
Benny and the Jets, Elton John.
Oh.
That was not a live recording.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that one.
Yeah, that is not a live recording. That was 100% studio, but they added a little bit of, I won't call it reverb and it won't call it delay, but they somehow added spatialization to it to where it sounded like it was a big concert hall.
Yeah.
But it
They
was
sure did.
100% studio, and that applause, if you listen to it in headphones, you can tell that is not a live audience. But they brought it in tastefully here and there, even a couple of whistles, and the, in the background, what have you, towards the end.
Yeah.
But it was all recorded in the studio.
I like that sort of idea, depending on when, where, and how it's used, and all this and that. I guess the last thing I'll say, last thing I'll say is that Deep Purple, a really badass band, came out with an album about 6 months ago or so. I didn't know until today, and I kind of like mentioned earlier that, oh, you should check it out if you get a chance.
I haven't had that chance yet.
Well, I'll just say this. They're old.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? They have brought back, I'm going to let the dog out. They have brought back, Mark, that feeling.
They have the juice still?
The magic of the sound and the vote. It doesn't matter what freaking age they are. They're freaking banging it up. Let me let my dog out. And I'm talking about just like back in the day.
Okay. I'll have to check it out. Eloy sent me a message earlier today saying Deep Purple's new song, Lazy Sod, is magic in a bottle. They brought back the vibes of the past. I'm going to have to check it out. I haven't had a chance. I haven't had time. It was absolutely, I don't know. We can go on and on about Deep Purple, but what can I say to that? Again, what I'm going to do after we land the plane here is I have found the link to that Todd Rundgren song. It's called Something to Fall Back On, and it was from the album Acapella in 1985, before sampling was a thing. Using the most rudimentary of keyboard. I mean, there was no MIDI or polyphonic or sampling or anything else. This was the infancy of sampling. He could record a sound and play one note at a time on a keyboard. He would record that, then record another note, then record another note, and then combine those three together to get a chord. And doing all of this for an entire album. If you go to the Trampled Underfoot podcast Facebook page, I will post it over there as soon as we're done live here. And check it out. You'll be as blown away as I was about it. I didn't know it was that old. I thought this was, mid 90s, mainly because of the technology that we have now. I didn't realize that this was while this technology was being invented. It's really something to hear, and it's really something to experience. And again, I'll post it over on our Facebook page as soon as we're done.
I had to make a couple of pit stops because he didn't quite reach the door,
Ruh-roh.
and it's like, and I can't argue with him
Nope.
because
He's too old.
He's too old, so it's kind of like, what are you gonna do?
All right, let's go ahead and wrap this up.
You can't argue with old folks because
Nope, you lose.
You lose. All right. So, anyways, we go live every Tuesday, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific Coast time here at the Trampled Underfoot podcast show channel on YouTube, and we also have the Facebook page. So be sure to check that out with the links that we leave over different topics to videos that we talk about, stuff like that, images and so on. And we also have a website, which is the trampledunderfootpodcast.com website, and you can check out our past video, our podcast
Episode.
audios, and download them as well. So be sure to check that out. And we're also sponsored by
Harneal Media, hosted by the man we love to tease, but that only because we love him. Steve does a fantastic job. If you are even thinking about toying with the idea of a website, there's nobody I'll recommend besides Steve. He's very good at what he does. He's very, very competitively priced. I'm proud to call him a friend of mine, and he can do as much or as little as you want him to do on that website. Do yourself a favor, head over to harnealmedia.com. There's a link in the description of this live stream, as well as every other live stream and video on this channel. And it's that way for a reason. He is that good. So head over to harnealmedia.com. That's HARNEAL media.com, sponsor of trampledunderfootpodcast.com.
All right, guys. Well, nothing. Enjoy the rest of your week. We hope you do the things that you love and be safe doing it. And we'll be back this same time, channel, location, and such. So, peace.
Do what you feel. Keep both feet on the wheel. Don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.